and welcome to Zoom with Czarny. I'm Dustin Czarny, Democratic Elections Commissioner for Onondaga County, and welcome to my interview show. This week, I have Perry Grossman, my good friend from the New York Civil Liberties Union, and we talk about the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act, and even the election alignment bill that is making its way and in the news a lot over the last week. We have a long discussion about that and other things democracy related. He's an amazing advocate for voters in New York State, and I'm always happy to talk to him each year around this time as we get prepared for the New York State legislative session. On the even year election bill, I have some news. My fellow commissioners and I, 9 of the other Democratic commissioners in many of the most populous counties in New York State, have signed on to a letter supporting the election alignment even year bill, and that will move many local elections to even years starting in 2026. You can always read, anytime I do a public thing like this, I always put it up at dustinczarny.com for transparency's sake. You can read that letter there and see if you're in support as well. So I think it's very important that us 10 elections commissioners came out. Now, it is not the Democratic Caucus of Commissioners, which you know I'm the chair of. That caucus has remained neutral. Us 10 commissioners are acting in our own stead, in our own personal beliefs, that this is a bill worth supporting. We know it's a controversial bill, but there's a lot of reasons to support it. Not the least of which is to have a governing body that is elected by as many people as possible in New York. And we think that that is a laudable goal. And I hope you take time to go to dustinczarny.com and read that letter. It's under the testimony section, but it's also right on the front page as well. So that being said, here is my interview with Perry Grossman, of the New York Civil Liberties Union. We have this great discussion of democracy, so please enjoy. And we're back, and I'm so happy to have my good friend Perry Grossman. He's the director of the Voting Rights Project at New York Civil Liberties Union, and just a great man to go talk to about voting. We talk every year. I'm so happy, to have you back, Perry. You've just been a wonderful resource for the show, but also for the citizens of New York. So thanks so much for coming back on Zoom with Czarny.
It's totally my pleasure. Love coming on here and talking with one of New York's best election commissioners. Just a guy in a show that's so committed to democracy and helping everybody vote. So let's get into it. Let's have a good time.
Oh, well, the last time we talked a year ago, we were talking about the recent passage and signing of the New York Voting Rights Act, the John R. Lewis New York Voting Rights Act. We're a year in. And I think some people want to know what's going on with that, what's not going on with it. Where are we in the stages? And, just kind of talk to us about a year later, what has been the effect of the New York Voting Rights Act?
Sure. So it's a big, complicated, important statute, and it's going to have a long rollout, but we're already seeing some good things. We've already seen the democracy canon, right? The canon of construction that's written into the law that says judges should always put a thumb on the scale of the voter and making sure that votes get counted. We've seen that applied in court to make sure that votes get counted. We know that the Attorney General's office has certified that they're going to be ready to start the nation's first state level pre-clearance program next year, which, for counties covered by the pre-clearance program, they are going to have to look and make sure that the changes to their certain election practices do not make voters of color worse off.
So next year, that's coming like 2024 next year, not 2025, but 2024.
Right. That's right, 2024. So that's going to be a development for you and for the election commissioners. But for the most part, I think it's actually not going to be a big change. I think it's going to be a really good, salutary effort. I think for the most part, commissioners in almost every decision they make are really trying to think about the community and make sure that all these changes are beneficial. And so this just adds another dimension of consideration to make sure that changes are not making voters of color worse off. So
Has she announced or has it been announced which counties are a part of this that we know are going to be part of pre-clearance right away? Do we know that?
we don't know that yet. I mean, we can certainly guess based on what we know about the prongs, and some of them are relatively easy to calculate. But there should be in the neighborhood of about 20 counties or so covered. I believe that includes the 5 in New York City. And so, a handful of jurisdictions that have been found liable for voting rights violations over the past 25 years. Same for a pattern of civil rights violations. High levels of housing segregation are going to bring in a number of counties. But again, I think this is going to be a really salutary exercise for the counties that are covered, and it's a thing we're frankly familiar with, right? We had 3 counties covered under federal preclearance.
Sure. So like when you're talking about housing segregation, I immediately think to my backyard here in Syracuse, one of the highest poverty districts in the nation. So and this is an Onondaga based podcast. So do we think that like Onondaga County is going to be in that first rollout of 20? Should we be looking towards that?
I would think that it's likely. It's likely, and I would expect that of the changes of the types of policies that are going to be covered, the things that will probably pop up most for you are moving polling places, which is not, you're not moving 50 polling places a year. You're moving a few here and there. But it'll just be an extra exercise to think about how the move is impacting folks and how do we minimize the burden based on voters of color. So
that's election day polling places, but probably also placement of early voting places as well if they have to be moved. Now, I should say for the listeners that boards of elections usually don't move polling places arbitrarily. Usually they're being moved because a polling place is closed down or something, a church has been sold or a private entity decides they don't want it. It's not about that you have to move it. It's about where you're moving it to. And I think that's probably going to be what pre-clearance is really going to come into play with, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, and I just really want to emphasize this, the vast majority of those kinds of changes are in response to those sort of things outside the control of the Board of Elections. And to the extent there are boards of elections that are going to play games from time to time, and we know they exist. We've seen them, we've sued them, we've won. This is a way to make sure that they're not able to play games. But for the most part, because the vast majority of these changes are just going to be in response to those external factors, it's just going to be looking at where those polling places are recited and making sure it's okay, which is, I think, an exercise that commissioners are probably going through in an informal way under any circumstances, because you don't want to make a polling place that people don't go to. But this will just put a little more structure to that.
So what are we seeing with how the NYVRA, even though it's like really kind of in its infancy, we've only done it for about a year. Again, a lot of the stuff hasn't even started yet because the Attorney General hasn't said it's going to start, and that's next year. And I think that's something we haven't talked about, since your last time on. So that's news right there. But what else? You were talking to me in our pre-show chat about that this is actually not having just an effect here in New York, but the fact that we did it in New York and we were the first state to roll out a Voting Rights Act, a comprehensive Voting Rights Act. What kind of effect is this having on other states?
Sure. So, and by the way, let's make sure we get back to the other provisions.
Oh, let's do that first. Then we'll get back to that.
Sure. So the other things I want to mention, right? There's going to be expanded language assistance. That's not going to get rolled out until 2025, but that's going to be a really good feature. Just making our polling places more welcoming to our naturalized citizen voters and voters whose first language is not English. And one thing that we will see more of is, we did see the first notice letter that was sent out to a jurisdiction over a potential violation of the New York Voting Rights Act. It was in the town of Mount Pleasant in Westchester. A group of Latinx voters sent a notice letter to the town because the town has at-large elections and racially polarized voting. And, I thought the town started out by doing the right thing. They went out and they hired, good bona fide experts, people that are, have bipartisan credentials and are well regarded in the field, to put out a report to tell the town what's going on. Those experts said that there was a violation of the Voting Rights Act in play, and they should consider remedying it. So, I hope the town is going to do the right thing. But, I will tell you that I saw at the public hearing they held on the proposed remedy a lot of really not surprising, but disappointing comments from the public. The fact is, this is an opportunity. The New York Voting Rights Act is an opportunity everywhere to make our elections more inclusive, more equitable. It is not an accusation that anyone is engaged in intentional racial discrimination. But I really saw a lot in that Mount Pleasant hearing that, like I said, it disappointed me, because you can really see people coming out and defending a thing that is not defensible. And you wonder why they do it. I don't wonder that much. I have a good sense of why they do it. But
I think we unfortunately know why some of these people do this, but yes.
Yeah. So there's that, and we'll see more of that over time. But the New York Voting Rights Act, I think one of the things that we saw at work in Mount Pleasant, which is really good, and the way the law was designed to work, is the potential plaintiffs, they sent a notice letter to the jurisdiction. The jurisdiction has a 50-day safe harbor period where they can voluntarily remedy the violation. It looked like they were taking advantage of that. So my hope is that other jurisdictions, regardless of what happens in Mount Pleasant, really go through the process in good faith, and save taxpayers the expense of defending a system that is almost certainly not worth defending.
So I kind of jumped the gun on this, but let's get back to the effect.
Yes, of course. So you mentioned the impact that it's having outside of New York State, and I am so glad and so proud to see what's happened, to see that what we in New York have inspired. And I want to give a lot of credit to my colleagues at the Legal Defense Fund. The Legal Defense Fund, of course, the vaunted civil rights firm founded by Thurgood Marshall. We have seen a state voting rights act pass based on ours in Connecticut. I hate admitting this in some small part, but Connecticut, by going after us, has the advantage of looking at what we've done and make some innovations here and there. But we have an opportunity to learn from them as well. It looks like New Jersey, Maryland, and Michigan may be poised to follow suit with their own voting rights act patterned on ours. And it's with a little bit of pride that I say that there's an article, a law review article that came out by a Harvard professor, Nick Stephanopoulos, which actually referred to state voting rights acts based on us as the New York model. So I'm very proud of the New York model. When I halted you before about the comprehensiveness of the Voting Rights Act, the first state voting rights act belongs to California, passed back in 2002, but that only got at the use of at-large elections. So which is a major innovation, right? At-large elections take place in almost all of our local government elections, and it really simplified remedying bad systems by saying that all you have to do is prove racially polarized voting, and that there's a remedy, and much less complicated than the Federal Voting Rights Act. And so credit to California for really being the genesis of all of this. But we took nearly 60 years of the Federal Voting Rights Act, 20 years of the California Voting Rights Act, and I think we built a really great statute, and I'm just very, very proud to see other states following suit. And I hope we can learn from them as they innovate based on what we did.
So, as we look to implement this Voting Rights Act, obviously, 20 counties would be a third of the counties in New York State, but probably population wise, we're talking about, larger coverage than that. Probably well over 50% of the voters of New York State might be covered under this. Does the New York Voting Rights Act do anything with redistricting, or is that just something that has to be done, separate that?
So yes, right. So voting, the redistricting is not one of the policies that's covered by preclearance. So counties don't necessarily have to run their redistricting programs, redistricting plans through the Attorney General's office to get them pre-cleared if they're one of the covered counties. You can sue over redistricting plans under the New York Voting Rights Act if they engage in racial vote dilution. And that is a major innovation, right? No previous state voting rights act has allowed for lawsuits in single member district systems, only at-large systems. And then there is a provision in the law which becomes a kind of de facto preclearance, which says if there is basically a successful suit over a redistricting plan, then the court retains jurisdiction over the county's redistricting, and that becomes a kind of preclearance.
Oh, right. So, I mean, that's good to know. We're, as you know, in the middle of a lawsuit here in Onondaga County, and it's been slow, but we hope to win that, and knowing that one of the outcomes it could be that it just goes back to the same redistricting commission that did this in the first place, or tried to do it in the first place. Knowing that the court might have some ability to continue to be a part of that. That's good to know. And then since we're getting into litigation, there's a lot of litigation going on in New York right now, and I know NYCLU has been part of briefs and amicus briefs and a lot of this, but there's the redistricting case that we're waiting from the appellate court, on congressional redistricting, and we're not going to talk a lot about that because we're kind of waiting for the decision. That's the only thing there's nothing to talk about. But one of the pieces of litigation that's going about is the new early voting by mail, statute that was passed by the legislature, signed by the governor in October, and immediately sued. And I will say it was sued under the new guidance, so at least they didn't go court shopping. They sued in Albany County, so they can't go find some judge that is favorable to them, but it's immediately sued. And I know you're not like the New York State Board of Elections deeply involved in this, but I know you've been following it. So can you kind of tell us what's going on with that suit, and because early voting by mail now, people are starting to think about, we got to start doing this, yet there's still this litigation out there.
Yeah, I'll do it in a very, very high level way, because my familiarity with it is only so deep. But the new early vote by mail law, provides an opportunity for any voter to receive a ballot before election day. It doesn't include receiving absentee ballots on election day. And it was passed under the state's the legislature's authority under Article 2, Section 7 of the New York State Constitution, which gives the legislature very, very broad authority to prescribe the manner of elections. And so a group of Republicans, headlined by
that's the facts. I mean, I know you're trying to be nonpartisan, but that is the facts. It's
well, it's not only the facts. They've not been quiet about making clear that this is a partisan lawsuit, and they think this is designed to benefit Democrats. And as a nonpartisan voting rights lawyer, I can't stress enough that giving people more options to vote benefits people who can go turn out voters. And it's an opportunity for campaigns, for organizers, for everybody who cares about voting, to get more folks to the polls, to have more voices heard. And so that's a positive to me. Anyway, the lawsuit says that the legislature doesn't have authority to authorize early voting by mail. That they're limited to providing absentee ballots only to, only to the classes who were described in Article 2, Section 2 of the New York State Constitution, which, as we may all be familiar at this point, provides for absentee ballots, or the legislature can provide a manner of voting for folks who are unable to appear at the polls because they're going to be out of the county or because of illness. Obviously, we had a lot of discussion about what because of illness means during the pandemic. And we know that extends to people with not just people who may be ill, but people who are caring for people with disabilities. We know that's an extension that's in there. And of course, people who are in jail, right? Or jail as opposed to prison, who are either confined for non-felony crimes or who are being held pre-trial and some presumption of innocence. They're entitled to absentee ballots as well. But the plaintiff's point in that lawsuit is the legislature cannot offer absentee ballots to anybody else. Those are the classes that are limited. And two other states which have constitutions similar to New York's in this respect, that have both the Article 2, Section 7 broad grant of authority to the legislature, but also the Article 2, Section 2, which talks about special solicitude for groups like those who may be prohibited from going to the polls because of illness or out of the county. So in those two states, Massachusetts and Pennsylvania, both neighbors, the Massachusetts court is a particularly well-regarded state court, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court. Both of those states found that with similar constitutions, the legislature could authorize a statute similar to the one that the legislature did. So, that's the backdrop we're working against here. And, I look at the New York State Constitution holistically, and Article 1, Section 1 of the New York State Constitution, literally the first substantive clause of the Constitution, says no member of this state shall be disfranchised.
Right.
That's a very serious statement right there. The first words of our Constitution: no member of this state shall be disfranchised. Now it goes on to say, except by the law of the land, of jury of our peer, or a jury of their peers. But none of that inhibits the legislature's authority. In fact, if anything, it gives the legislature extremely broad and positive charge to expand democracy. All right. And so when you combine that, when you look at Article 2, which covers voting and the manner of elections, and of course, one of your favorite sections, I'm sure, Article 2, Section 8, the bipartisan boards of elections, right? When you read Article 2 as a whole, in combination with that very clear, broad charge that no member of this state shall be disfranchised, the only conclusion that you can come to is that the New York State Legislature has very, very broad authority to prescribe the manner of voting, that they can provide a broad manner of voting for everybody. They can provide special solicitude for certain groups, but the ability to provide special solicitude for those certain groups does not limit their ability to provide accessible voting for everybody else as well. So, that's my personal opinion on the case. And I'm paying, reasonably close attention, waiting to see what happens. I believe the motions are fully briefed, and we're waiting to see what the judge in Albany says. But obviously, we know this is one that's going to go up to the third department and then to the Court of Appeals. So we're all waiting to see what happens, and I'll be paying close attention as it goes up.
We really got into the early voting by mail in my last episode with Jared Berg of Vote Early. And so I don't want to get too far into that. We've talked about it, but I wanted to hear from you on that, because I think you have a unique perspective about the legal arguments on that. But I think what we haven't covered on this program is something that I know that you're very passionate about, and that's the election alignment, or so-called even year bill. And some breaking news on this program: I'm issuing a letter to the governor, probably later today, as when this airs, this week, with about 10 other elections commissioners in favor of this bill. The Democratic caucus as a whole had decided to be neutral back in April, but individual commissioners can do what they want. And some commissioners this week Democratic commissioners decided to issue letters saying they're against it. So those of us that have been in for it are issuing our own letters, and these are the big counties that are would have to have a lot to deal with here on this, yet we're in favor of it. Monroe, Erie, Nassau, Oneida, there may be a couple others at the time of airing this. I can't say them all because they haven't officially signed on, but I'm hoping to hear from them and later today or tomorrow. But anyways, we're on board. But I think this is a bill that like people kind of gloss their eyes over because it's so far set in the future. But why is there so much passion over this even year bill, so to speak, both pro on your side and maybe some of the arguments against, which I find specious, but and convenient. But you want to talk about that?
Sure. This bill is one that I have extremely strong feelings on, and I don't feel the need to pull a lot of punches. I think the opposition to this bill is utter nonsense. I think it's an embarrassment. I think it is just a naked effort on the part of mostly local elected officials to preserve their own power at the expense of the voters. I am ashamed for the local elected officials who are saying nonsense things like this bill disrespects local elected officials, like, oh, local issues are going to get lost if these elections are consolidated. There are so many ridiculous arguments. I'm happy to go through them one by one and pick them apart. Here's what we know for sure. The difference in turnout between even years and odd years is colossal. This is an Onondaga County program. Let me start with Onondaga County. When we look between 2014 and 2022, the average turnout for even years is 30 points higher than for odd years. 30 points. The average turnout for an odd year election,
right? It is. It's easily 30 points, and we just went through one of the lowest turnout elections in memory this year.
Yep, right. That's an average, right? Because we want to be fair, right? We want to say that look, the years when the countywide offices are up, and the years when the countywide offices are not up, and only the ledge is up, right? We want to make sure that we're taking care of all of that. Obviously, some are going to be higher than others, but the turnout is embarrassing. But even worse than that, not only is the turnout low, it is racially disparate, right? We are seeing an older, whiter, more affluent electorate. But by the way, white turnout drops through the floor. Senior turnout declines precipitously. Youth turnout, though, really, really drops down. And we see, unfortunately, low turnout in odd year elections among voters of color of all groups. Now, I've heard ridiculous things like, oh, this is about apathy and people who care about elections turn out. No. The people who turn out in odd year elections are the most politically connected, the most politically well-informed, the most affluent, the most easily able to stay on top of these elections. And there is not the same effort. There is not the same information environment to get people to the polls. Plenty of people simply do not know that odd year elections are taking place, and these are important offices. It diminishes these local offices to keep them in years when nobody is turning out. And so, I find, you said specious. I would probably use a string of expletives, but specious is probably a good word to use on a family show like this one.
It's not that much of a family show. We can say bullshit because I think they are. They're horrible. The arguments being made, by my county executive and other county executives, and county legislators is the whole. Well, we're going to see this issue get lost and that the people who turn out in odd years are the special voters who are tuned in to their their local elections. But what it really does is it also, not, we've talked about turnout, but it's also about competitiveness, because what we see is it's really hard to get people to run for office in
Sure.
in local years. These local elections are left blank. There's so much, the Syracuse.com talked about the apathy election here in Onondaga County. They overblew it because they forgot about all the town candidates that were running, but whatever. They were focused on a couple of different areas. But part of the problem is because people are not aligned to think about elections except for every 2 years, and so the common person who might want to run for office doesn't know that they have to be ready to run for office in February of an odd year, and forget that there's even an election, and then all of a sudden it passes them by.
Organizing is expensive. It is time consuming. Getting information together, putting it out there can be expensive and time consuming. When you put things in even years, you are in an environment where information is flowing freely. People are attuned to the political environment. They are ready to think about the issues. What I think is not only are local issues not going to get lost in even years, they're finally going to get the attention they deserve, right? So if you're concerned about the infrastructure in your community, you can not only put that to your local elected officials, you can finally hear from your state legislators, from your members of Congress, maybe even presidential candidates. What do they intend to do about infrastructure that's going to help your community, right? We talk about things like parks and libraries, public safety, sanitation, transportation. These are issues that candidates for office at almost every level should be caring about. And you know what? If anything, local issues may take a predominance in when we're talking about these more nationalized these federal elections. So, I think this is a way to get those issues really out there. But, to make people organize for elections every single year. And by the way, we have such election fatigue. We've got village elections in March. We've got school district elections in May. We have the primary in June. There may be more village elections at another day in June. We've got the general in November. If you've got library, fire, water, the famous escalator district, all kinds of other nonsense like that, that might very well be in December. You could find yourself with 4 or 5 election days in a year without a whole lot of effort in most parts of the state. So, pulling these things together at a time when the information is flowing, when people are organized, when they know that it's time to vote, is really going to do a service to democracy. It's going to boost turnout. It's going to make turnout more equitable. And that's what we want. We want the most voters at the polls because that is going to give us the most responsive government. And we want it when everybody's going to the polls, not simply, and frankly, I think this is a part that maybe doesn't get talked about as much, but when you've got these smaller, lower attention, low turnout local elections, those candidates, those campaigns, they're not as well resourced. So they're only going to go to the highest propensity voters. They're going to look at the voter file and say, who's cast ballots in the last 3 odd year elections? Let's just send mailers to them. Let's just go knock on their doors. They're going to be less likely to go after those low propensity voters because the environment is such that in low turnout elections, people are going to go for the voters they know and not try and expand the electorate.
Yeah, and one of the points that we made in our letter is about, in the age of election denialism, having an electorate that is actually choosing their leaders and being a part of choosing their leaders is a way to combat this apathy and election denialism that's out there, because then the leaders are reflective of the public as a whole, or in more of the electorate, as opposed to, again, we had 29% turnout here in Onondaga County this year. That means we had a wonderful close election with county clerk. 300 votes went to a county-wide hand count. But that means that 15% of the voting public chose that winner. I'm glad they chose Emily Essie. She's going to be awesome. But it's only 15% of the voting public, and as we know, about 40% of the populace as a whole that could be registered to vote are not registered to vote, according to some studies. And it's going down a little bit with the new tools that we have in place, and hopefully automatic voter registration will have that. But I mean, you're talking about, you know, a governing coalition of 8% of the public, and that's why people are disaffected with local government, because they're not choosing their leaders, and then the leaders aren't listening to the rest of the populace because they're not participating in the election.
Yeah, there's another point I want to make, which is another canard I hear, which is that this is some kind of power grab by the Democrats, right? This is what I've heard again and again from Republicans. And number one, I don't even know how that's possible. These are local elections. New York City voters cannot all of a sudden vote in Onondaga County elections. You are dealing with Onondaga County voters in Onondaga County. You're dealing with Jefferson County voters in Jefferson County. You're just going to have more of them going to the polls to cast their ballots in local elections if these things are moved into odd years. So when I hear elected officials opposing this because they say it's partisan, what they're telling me is that their party benefits from vote suppression, and that's what they want to see happen.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what it is. It's like they think that more people vote. You can't get much more simple than this. The more people that vote, they believe, the less likely that they have a chance at winning, and that is sad. I mean, and it's also probably not true. Like, that is the other thing, is that a lot of these red counties that we've seen in upstate New York, their low propensity voters tend to be more Republican than Democratic. I mean, they tend to turn out for presidential elections. And so, in many areas of the state, it's going to have the opposite effect. It's actually going to hurt Democrats, and that's okay, because more of the populace is voting. It's not about whether Democrats are going to get elected or Republicans are going to get elected. And, and we just had a very low turnout election, and Democrats did pretty well in Onondaga County because of the mood of the electorate. That, this is not, there's so many factors that go into who wins elections, but servicing more voters and giving those voters more choices, it's going to be better for government as a whole.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's going to make my life hard. But I recognize that the legislature, in their esteemed wisdom, when they pass this, the rollout is not like overnight. This is going to take, if the governor signs it, I'm going to do some deep dives on how this works, because we'll save it for then. But it's really not even starting till 2026. It won't be fully in effect until 2030. There's a 4-year rollout where, piece by piece, more offices will be rolling into the even years. And, I actually think it's one of the things that the legislature has done right, because so many times they give me something and they're like, all right, do it tomorrow, commissioners. And that's not what they've done here. So we have time to work with our vendors, time to work with technology, time to address some of the technological issues to accommodate that and scale up as we go as well.
Yeah, people say, why are we doing all these elections at once? That would be a massive burden on the commissioners, even if it were possible to move literally all the local elections from odd years to even years in one fell swoop. For city elections, that's going to require a state constitutional amendment, which I am strongly in favor of and look forward to voting. To watch New York City municipal turnout plummet in mayoral elections, city council elections, when those elections matter so much, DA elections, these are elections we really do need to see in high turnout years. And so I look forward to eventually getting all those races into even years. But good to start with this. I'd like to see it happen. It was funny. I was just thinking about it. There are places where Democrats benefit madly from odd year elections, right? The governor of Kentucky is a Democrat, and I don't want to underestimate his political skills, but in an even year, it's hard to imagine him winning, right? The outgoing governor of Louisiana, the two-term outgoing governor of Louisiana, is a Democrat. Louisiana is not electing a Democratic governor in even years, right? These are not hotly contested battlegrounds. So, I think what you're suggesting about how more heavily Republican counties may see surges in Republican turnout because of those patterns, I think that's very likely. And so I find the whole this is a partisan move very, very silly. But what it really is a move to empower the voters and to make sure they're better able to participate in local elections, because these elections matter so much. I know we talk about the big horse races, the presidential races, all these competitive congressional seats, but truly, what matters more than those services we receive from our local government? Public education, sanitation, roads, property taxes,
Yeah.
libraries. We can do all that.
Yeah, which zoning, housing. I mean,
Yeah.
that's all local, and we have a housing crisis in New York State, and that's
Yeah.
So I hope the governor signs it. I hope by the time this airs tomorrow, she's already signed it, but I don't think that's going to be the case. I think it's going to be right down to the wire. So if you're in favor of that, you need to get on the phone with the governor's office, write letters, and let them know that you're also in favor of that as well.
Yeah.
Well, Perry, we're kind of getting towards the end of the program here, and I always like to end with my catch-all but kind of lazy question of what haven't we talked about? What's on your mind that maybe we haven't been able to talk about that you'd like to chat about?
Ooh, that's a good one. All right, couple quick things. Number one, let me talk about some things for the upcoming legislative cycle that I want to keep people's eyes on. One is I'm hoping that we'll finally see the passage of a statewide database for voting and elections materials. I think we're seeing some good conversations take place that are getting everybody on the same page, because it really will be so much easier once we have the data from 3,000 local jurisdictions, not just the 58 boards of elections, but everybody holding voting elections in one place. So optimistic about that. Let's keep our eyes on it, and let's hope the governor puts it in her policy book and the executive budget. And to move away just slightly, but stay in the realm of democracy and voting rights, but away from the ballot box, but over to another form of voting rights. One of the things I care a lot about as a democracy issue is jury service, right? Just as voters hold elected officials accountable at the ballot box, the people hold the administration of the law accountable by voting in the jury box. What do juries do? Juries vote, right? Literally. And when we're looking at grand juries that are 23 people or petite juries that are 12 people, boy, when we say every vote counts, we are not screwing around. So, we have low jury participation in New York State. And I think given how consequential jury service is, everybody should be looking at ways to do more and better. But one of the problematic qualifications for being a juror is you have to have never had a felony conviction. And the fact is, we've got about 1 million New Yorkers with felony convictions. And in New York, you are permanently banned for life from serving on a jury if you've ever been convicted of a felony. So if you have a drug possession conviction from when you were 18 years old in 1987, 54 years old today, you're still barred from serving on a jury.
I didn't know that. I did not know that.
Yeah, and it doesn't make sense, right? We did the right thing a couple of years ago, and we restored those ballot box rights to people with prior felony convictions. And voting and jury service have always been aligned. If you go back to the founding, you've got quotes from folks like Thomas Jefferson saying that he thinks that having control over the judiciary through the jury box is actually even more important than having control over the legislature through the ballot box. We have 3 amendments in the Bill of Rights that are related to juries. These are critical functions, and so we should keep these things congruent. And so I want to recommend the Jury of Our Peers Act. It is A 1432, sponsored by Assemblymember Aubrey. Assemblymember Aubrey, who is retiring this section after a 30-year career in the New York State Legislature. And it is also sponsored on the Senate side by Senator Clear, S-206. And that is going to repeal the permanent ban on jury eligibility by people with felony convictions. Now, I just want to make abundantly clear, this does not mean we are putting a person with a felony conviction on every single jury. It just means they're going to be in the pool like everybody else. Jurors are going to go through the same screening process to make sure they don't have conflicts of interest or biases that would compromise their impartiality, just like everybody else. And one of the things I'm pleased to say is that the American Probation and Parole Association, the trade group for community supervision officers, parole officers, has been an enthusiastic supporter of this bill because they understand that civic engagement, including jury service, including voting, are really important to helping people achieve good reentry outcomes, because most people who go into our criminal legal system, they're going to come out and come back into our neighborhoods, and we've got to be prepared to help them, to embrace them, to make sure that they are successful and that they're able to move on and be productive, contributing citizens, because that's a much, much better and more cost-effective outcome than them, unfortunately, going back into the criminal legal system, which we all want to avoid.
Yeah, I mean, this is where I understand well, I actually don't understand it all that well, but I kind of understand the reluctance of the public to restore these types of things, voting rights. They want to continue to punish the convicted felon, who, we must remember, that person has already served their time. They've paid their debt to society back, and continue, outside of a jury tampering charge or a or a voting fraud charge. I actually think that, if those were in there, I could see a reason to keep people like that out of a jury pool or something like that. But if you're not committing voter fraud, if you're not in a jury tampering, and you've paid your debt to society, and society, the justice system has brought you out of your era of punishment, so to speak, then you should be able to reclaim full rights as a citizen, and voting and jury service are those full rights. And we talk about how important those 2 things are all the time, yet we're saying, well, we don't need these people to be a part of it, and that's that I'm glad you brought that up, because I had not realized that.
Yeah, it's these are folks who are out in the community, and we want them to be successful. We want them to be a part of those community institutions, those democratic, small d democratic institutions, so that they're bound up in the fabric of the community in a way that supports them and makes them successful. In fact, I have seen rehabilitation programs for juvenile offenders that have used jury service as a way of teaching responsibility and civic values, right? Like, jury service has been called by some of our founders as a great civic classroom. I think it might have been if it was John Adams or it's into Tocqueville, but either way, it is a great civic classroom. I encourage everybody to go serve on a jury, but also let's make our jury pool more equitable. Let's make it broader, because the fact is, while this is not a qualification that is without a severe, long-standing racial impact, right? We have a lawsuit ongoing in Manhattan in federal court because you've got a history of racialized policing and prosecution that goes back decades and decades and decades. Black people have been convicted of felonies in Manhattan at a rate of over 20-1 over the last 20 years alone. To take one particular statistic that I find very, very jarring, Black men have been convicted of drug felonies in Manhattan at a rate of 130-1 compared to white women. And studies show that drug use does not vary significantly by race or gender, right? Certainly not at 130-1 clip. So this is something that we should be investing in terms of broadening civil participation as a matter of remedying longstanding injustice and moving our communities forward in a very positive way. So I appreciate the invitation to say what I'm thinking, because it was a lot, but hopefully it was important.
It was a great conversation, Perry, as always. And thank you for what you do for New York voters. Perry Grossman, the director of the Voting Rights Project at the New York Civil Liberties Union, and all-around hero to democracy. Thank you so much for coming on Zoom with Czarny, and I hope we're going to have a productive 2024 electoral season.
You're too kind, Dustin, and all the same kudos to you. Thank you for all you do, not just for the voters of Onondaga County, although they should certainly appreciate you, but for all the advocacy you do for a robust, inclusive democracy for New York State as a whole. I really do appreciate it. I know my colleagues do too.
Thank you. And that was my interview with Perry Grossman of the New York Civil Liberties Union. Very happy to have him on the program. Here's what's coming up over the next week. Next week for Zoom with Czarny, I'm going to have Erica Smitka. She is, one of the top people at the New York State League of Women Voters. We talk just about every year, and we're going to be talking next week about many different things, I'm sure, if we haven't talked yet. So, but we'll be talking about what the league is doing for voters statewide. Weekly walk this weekend. I hope to get back to doing the weekly walk this weekend. I'll be doing election wrap up of 2023, just missed stories in that election, as now that the election is now certified. And you can see that certification at onvote.net. And of course, Commissioner Carr next week, Tuesday, I'll be talking about the Skinny Atlas special election that is happening next Tuesday. I'll be talking about it. I'm going to see if I can get that done in the morning on Tuesday, because the election is on Tuesday from noon to 8. They're getting rid of their receiver of taxes and a position that is now open, and they're trying to get rid of it to be able to roll that function into town clerks. And I just want to talk about why we're having this weird special election, just weeks after the November election. So we'll see if I can get that in. I may even try to get that in on Monday, so you can, so it'll be out there before Tuesday. So that's all I got. And please remember, you can go to dustinczarny.com and subscribe to my email notifications, and you can get, content and election news updates sent to you. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.